All right, in Ephesians chapter 4, verses 25 through 32, I've entitled this Dress for Spiritual Success. Dress for Spiritual Success. Maybe you've heard the expression, clothes make the man. Clothes make the man. I'm always impressed. Isaac, he's always wearing he's got a long sleeve shirt with the power tie, black slacks and the black shoes. You're always looking sharp there, Isaac. That looks great. A businessman wears a suit, power tie, shine black shoes, right? He wants to look his best to impress his customers and to make the deal. Here in verses 25 through 32, Paul's going to tell us as Christians how we can dress for spiritual success. And he's going to tell us that we need to put off the old clothes. We need to put on the new clothes. And he's going to give us a reason why. So there's the negative command, there's the positive command, and then there's the motivation for change. And these verses here give us insight into how we can have our minds renewed. Verse 23 says, "Be renewed in the spirit of your mind." And it would start with reading and studying, memorizing these verses here in 25 through 32. So let's look at the specifics that he gives us. We've had the general principle, putting off the old behavior, putting on the new. Now he's going to get specific and tell us how we're to live. First of all, he says in verse 25, "Putting away lying, let each one of you speak truth with his neighbor, for we are members of one another." All right, so the first thing he tells us that we need to do is we need to replace lying with truth-telling. Replace lying with truth-telling. Therefore, notice verse 25 ties this section to what we've seen in verses 20 through 24. Christians are to put off lying. Lying is a part of the old man. That is the way we used to live as unbelievers. You know, we live in an age of deception. Satan is a liar, we're told in John 8:44, and the father of lies. A lot of people are deceived today by the lies that are being given to them by the media. And some people struggle with telling the truth. As you read through the Bible, you have various stories of individuals who lied. Remember Cain? Cain lied to God after he murdered his brother Abel. God said to him, "Where is your brother?" Cain lied and he says, "I don't know. Am I my brother's keeper?" Abraham, remember when he was down in Egypt with his wife Sarah and she was taken by Pharaoh? Why was that? Because he lied. He didn't say that she was his wife. He said that she was his sister. Pharaoh took Sarah into his harem, but God protected her. Remember Peter when he was warming himself by the fire and they questioned him when Jesus was being tried, and Peter lied and denied the Lord. He said that he didn't know him 3 times. Ananias and Sapphira, they tried to make it appear as if they were giving more money than they really did. Acts chapter 5. What happened? God struck them with premature death. We've already seen in chapter 4 and verse 15 that we need to speak the truth in love. Speaking the truth in love. And he tells us here in verse 25, "Put away lying. Let each one of you speak truth with his neighbor." The neighbor is one who is near. And why is that? Because we are members of one another. One thing that will divide a church is deceit and lying. Deceit and lying divide. But truth-telling will unite a body. And we need to speak the truth in love with one another. Why? Because we are members of the same body. Okay? That's the focus of this first behavior change. Now the second one is to replace sinful anger with righteous anger. Notice he says, be angry and do not sin. Do not let the sun go down on your wrath, and nor give place to the devil. Now, there are a lot of interpretations. If you look at the commentary for this imperative here, you have the interpretive options. Let me just read them for you. It could be a declarative indicative. You are angry, yet you do not sin. It could be an interrogative indicative. Are you angry? Then do not sin. A command imperative. Be angry and do not sin. A permissive imperative. Be angry if you must, but do not sin. A conditional imperative. If you are angry, do not sin. A concessive imperative. Although you may get angry, do not sin. And then the prohibitive imperative. Do not be angry and do not sin. Those are the interpretive options for the command that's given here in verse 26. Dan Wallace has written an article on orgisthistha in Ephesians 4:26, command or condition. And basically he argues here that for the command imperative, be angry and do not sin. Be angry and do not sin. You know, there is a righteous anger that we can have. We can have a righteous anger. Wallace says this, in Ephesians 4:26, Paul is placing a moral obligation on believers to be angry as the occasion requires. As his injunction is in a parenthetic section, dealing with how believers are to interact with each other rather than with the world, he probably has in mind a righteous indignation which culminates in church discipline. Okay? So, what he's saying, because the focus is on our relationship with one another, we're members of one another, that there is a place for a righteous anger which leads to church discipline. We should not tolerate sin in our midst. Again, read the book of 1 Corinthians, and you see that emphasis there. Notice Wallace says, since this righteous indignation is part of our response to imitate God, it must be enlightened wrath, or wrath whitened by grace. As God himself does not dwell in anger, neither should we. Anger is the dark side of God, his strange work. So too, wrath must never characterize our behavior as a believer. If we fail to obey this injunction, not only will the enemy continue to make well-plowed inroads into our churches, but we ourselves will, by suppressing our holy indignation, be put as a main sample of humanity. So he's saying here that we need to, if we become angry with sin, we have to do something about it. We know from Matthew chapter 18 that if we see a brother in sin, we're to go confront him one-on-one, then take someone with us, and then we're to tell it to the church, and then the ultimate church discipline is excommunication from the church. Okay? So there is a righteous response to sin in the body. You remember Jesus was angry, and yet he did not sin. Jesus was angry. In Mark chapter 3, the Pharisees were watching to see if Jesus would heal on the Sabbath. And Jesus said, is it lawful on the Sabbath to do good or to do harm, to save a life or to kill? But they kept silent. It says, after looking around at them in anger. It says that about Jesus. He looked around at the Pharisees in anger. He was grieved because of their hardness of heart. And he said to the man with the withered hand to stretch it out. And he healed the man with a withered hand. So Jesus was angry and did not sin. Remember, he overturned the tables of the money changers in the temple. Okay? He actually used a cord. Okay? He was angry and yet he did not sin. Now, Paul says here, don't let the sun go down on your wrath, and don't give place to the devil. That is, don't go to bed angry. That's good advice. Right? So deal with your anger. If you're having a problem with your spouse, with your wife, resolve it before you go to bed. Forgive. Ask her forgiveness. Reconciliation is important. Matthew chapter 5, verses 21 through 24. Didn't Jesus talk about being reconciled with your brother before you come to worship? Resolve those differences. He talks about that. And why should we do that? We don't want to give place to the devil. We don't want to give the devil, who is the slanderer, the one, an opportunity to divide the church. And he will take every opportunity he can to do that. Now notice verse 28, he says we need to replace stealing with working. Let him who stole steal no longer, but rather let him labor, working with his hands what is good, that he might have something to give him who has need. So replace stealing with working. Apparently, there was someone in the church at Ephesus who was a thief, because he sort of singles him out here in verse 28. Let him who stole steal no longer. So this change from the plural to the singular would seem to indicate here that there was a thief there in the church at Ephesus. If a man didn't have a job in the first century, and to support himself and his family, he often resorted to stealing. You know, there needs to be a change here. Let him who stole steal no longer, but rather let him labor, let him work, and work with his hands. That is, the hands that were used to steal things are now to be used for work. He needs to use his hands for work and not for stealing. And notice, not so that he can have things for himself, but he might have something to give to him who has a need. So that's the change that Christ can make in the life of a new convert. He can change a thief into a generous person. How we work can be a testimony to a lost world, and how we live our lives before them can influence them. Honer says this in his commentary: work has many benefits. It provides for a person's material needs. It provides something useful to do, something beneficial to others, enables one to materially help someone who has a need. These are all good purposes for our jobs.